Hello and welcome to Sit Down with the Chief. We're here with editor Richard Steier, who's going to talk about the PBA taking a new step forward in its bid for arbitration, even though it's still waiting for the state board to approve that process. Richard?
Well, essentially, the union last week appointed Kenneth Feinberg to be its arbitrator. This is notable for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it still hasn't gotten approval from the Public Employment Relations Board to move forward to arbitration, and that is always something that has to be done before it can simply take that step, go beyond the bargaining table. The other is that Mr. Feinberg is an unusual choice in this case. He's somebody who's best known for being the special master who dealt with the September 11th Victims Compensation Fund and got very high marks for that. He's a compensation expert who has also been involved in determining what a fair reward was for people who were exposed to Agent Orange, as well as to terrorist bombings in which they suffered various injuries. What he doesn't have up until now is any experience in dealing with wage arbitration, the typical contract type of process that the PBA more than any other union engages in. But the union is clearly looking to push on this. The city had a muted reaction to it. The Labor Commissioner, Bob Lynn, said that he thought that once all the arguments were heard by the parties, that you're going to wind up with a fair and equitable resolution. And what Bob means by fair and equitable is very different from what PBA President Pat Lynch means. There are a number of other questions that loom in terms of this arbitration. One is the fact that at the moment, the bargaining round that basically theoretically has just begun, although there are some unions still working under contracts that haven't expired yet, has not produced any settlements, and so that there is no pattern that exists. The PBA has always been most comfortable if it has a clear field to try and get something, because it doesn't have to worry about being locked into a pattern. The city always prefers to have a pattern before the PBA comes in, because its demands are always more ambitious than the rest of the unions, and so it would always like to be able to tell an arbitrator when it comes to this point that you can't bust the pattern, that it's too much part of the city process and city labor history. And so that the question becomes, if and when PERB does order an arbitration, how long will it be before the city suddenly looks to get a deal with some other union that it can use for a pattern? It hasn't seemed in a great hurry up until now, but that would probably change dramatically if it got to the point where the PBA was able to begin its argument and say, well, there's nothing out there as a pattern, so you should just pay us what neighboring jurisdictions are paying their police officers. This has always been the PBA's argument. It's had some success in terms of getting a little bit more than other unions, sometimes by basically reducing compensation for cops who haven't yet been hired, but it is yet to make good on its goal of getting a market rate, which is what it defines as paying them on a par with what is being paid in places like Nassau and Suffolk, and also more modestly, places like Newark or the MTA Police Department. And this time around, the union is focusing on state troopers, in part because Governor Cuomo has ordered that they be deployed in New York City to a far greater degree than ever before. And what the PBA argues is that state troopers right now are getting 37% more than its members are, and that's based on a 25-year compensation model, and it also does not include the variable supplements fund, which cops get if they work for 20 years and retire as a service retirement rather than a disability, and that's something that no other union in the tri-state area receives, and it's a big edge in terms of evening out some of the compensation. So we're a long way to go before anything really happens in terms of this, but clearly the union is champing at the bit and would like to get going as soon as possible, but chances are the city will make some counter move along the way to try and make it more difficult for the PBA to get the kind of ambitious contract that it's looking for.
Okay. Thank you, Richard Steier, and thank you for watching Sit Down with the Chief.